Thanks so much for joining me, Brian Smith, again with our monthly compliance podcast. Good afternoon, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I couldn't be better. Our last podcast or a webinar that we put together was kind of a recap of all of the different programs that are out there, the EIDLs, the PPPs, the car ramrod,
ERTC,
ERTC, yeah,
KFMLA, EPSL.
all of the acronyms. This week or this month, we're going to dive in a little bit deeper and kind of talk a little more specifically about the EIDL program. And I'm kind of excited to learn a little bit more about this. So I thank you for putting all the great content together.
You bet. No problem.
Let's jump right in and not waste any more time. What highlights can you provide regarding the SBA's recently announced changes, to the COVID-19 EIDL program?
All right. So on September 8th, the SBA announced massive changes to the COVID-19 Economic Injury Disaster Loan. That's the EIDL. The major changes include increasing the EIDL cap from 500,000 to 2 million. So a borrower can now request more funds up to $2 million if they have already received a COVID-19 EIDL. This maximum amount of $2 million includes any funds that the borrower has already received. Okay.
Okay.
The implementation of a 2-year deferred payment period was just the changes enacted. Prior to that, there was an 18-month deferred payment period. So they added 6 more months to the deferment. So you get 2 years till you have to start making your first payments.
Okay.
And then that change comes without any action on the part of the borrower. And that includes borrowers that don't go for additional amount and borrowers that do. The SBA will extend the deferment period of all existing COVID loans to 24 months. So borrowers don't have to do anything. And if they don't get an additional amount, they still have that 2 years to make their first payment. Another thing that they changed from September 8th, the first 30 days after that, the changes were announced, is exclusively for processing loans of $500,000 or less. So your smaller restaurants can get in there first.
They get first crack at the funds. That's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the SBA will begin approving loans greater than $500,000 on October 8th. But if you're going for a loan more than $500,000, don't wait until October 8th to apply. You can apply now, get in line, and then once October 8th comes around, the SBA will start approving those larger loans. And then the last little piece of change, there was a simplification of the affiliation requirements. Now, there's so many details, and we're not going to go into those. It's way beyond the scope of this discussion. But the new affiliation requirements will mimic those of the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, so it makes it a little easier for larger groups to get a loan.
Cool. That's kind of the program updates as of almost 2 weeks ago, or a little over 2 weeks ago. That's kind of the program as a whole. Let's boil this down and get a little bit more restaurant specific then. Was there any changes in qualifications that would have major impacts on restaurants specifically?
Yes, the changes announced by the SBA also expand COVID-19 EIDL eligibility from organizations with no more than 500 employees. So prior to these changes, you had to have less than 500 employees in the businesses, right? However, these changes for the hardest hit industries, and restaurants are listed as one of the hardest hit industries, the employee threshold is 500 employees or fewer per physical location, provided the business has no more than 20 locations. So if a large group had, let's say they had 15 locations and 300 employees at each location, prior to these changes, they would not qualify. Now they will.
Got it. Okay, so still pretty large restaurants there.
Yes.
with a lot of employees, but it certainly could impact a certain few restaurant groups out there. So that's good to know.
Absolutely.
I always have to know, what can we use this stuff for? We get these funds, where can we spend it? What can we put the money towards?
Well, the loan proceeds can be used as working capital to pay any normal operating expenditures, including payroll expenses, rent, utilities, purchasing equipment, for example, and paying debt. And the COVID-19 EIDL funds now can be used to prepay commercial debt and make regularly scheduled payments to federal business debt, including debt that's held by the SBA.
Really interesting. Okay, so on the opposite side of that coin, are there any restrictions on things that the EIDL funds, cannot be used for?
Yes, there are a couple. A borrower may not use funds to expand their business or start a new business.
Okay.
A borrower may not use the funds to make prepayments on debt that is owned by a federal agency, including SBA. So you can make regularly scheduled payments to the SBA, but you can't make prepayments to the SBA, okay? And then this last one will be for very few businesses, but I wanted to mention it. A borrower may not use the funds to make prepayments on debt that is owned by a small business investment company.
Okay, that all makes sense. If I were a borrower and I needed to know how much I would be able to get in this EIDL program, what's the easiest way for me to figure that out and find that information out?
So, good question. If the business was in operation before January 1st, 2019, your maximum eligible loan amount is calculated by taking the 2019 gross receipts minus your cost of goods sold and then multiply that by 2.
Okay.
If the business was not open for the entire year of 2019, but did begin operations in 2019, the gross receipts and cost of goods sold would be annualized. So if you had 6 months worth of data, you just annualize that to determine what your full year would have been, and then go through that same calculation. But we have to remember that any COVID-19 EIDL proceeds received prior to this go around, remember, a borrower can request more funds. So if they've already received a loan, that amount is subtracted from what you can still receive.
So if they received a small portion, they can kind of make up the difference if it's greater, but they can't go all in again on another full EIDL loan.
You got it.
Totally makes sense. What happens if the business wasn't open at all in 2019?
So in the rare circumstance that they were not open in 2019, an eligible business must have begun operations by the end of January 2020. So if they're not in business, so if they started their business in February 1st of 2020, they're not eligible. Okay. Sure. So if they open that business in January 2020, the gross receipts from 2020 and cost of goods sold would be used to just determine the loan amount using that same formula. Gross receipts minus cost of goods sold times 2.
Cool. Now that we kind of know how to calculate out the loan, what if a borrower already received? You mentioned that it does have to be subtracted from the remaining amount that they're trying to calculate and receive in funds. But let's walk through maybe a couple more scenarios just so that crystallizes in my mind.
Absolutely. So like all COVID relief, there have been many changes throughout this program. The first COVID-19 EIDL limit was 150,000. Then it was increased to 500,000, and now it's at 2 million. So there's been a lot of changes along the way. But the calculation of the amount a borrower is eligible for has always been the same. That gross receipts minus cost of goods sold times 2. Sure. That hasn't changed. So, for example, if a business calculated that they were eligible for a $3 million EIDL loan, but had only received 500,000 because that was what the cap was at the time of the loan, that business would now be eligible to increase the original loan by 1.5 million to get up to that maximum of 2 million. Okay, so on the opposite side, if that same business had calculated that they were only eligible for $400,000 based on that gross receipts minus COGS times 2, and they did receive that full $400,000, they would not be eligible for an increase at this time because their business had already received the maximum EIDL loan that they were eligible for.
Got it. So it doesn't extend what you're capable of taking out, but you can apply, or you can extend what you may have received if it was above and beyond what you already have received. Yeah, it's kind kind of a goofy way to explain that. For new borrowers that aren't familiar with this program at all, what are the terms? Like, what are the repayment terms? What are the borrower? What does a new borrower need to know?
Good question. So the COVID-19 EIDL program, which runs through December 31st of 2021, of course, unless the funds run out sooner than that. But the EIDL program offers a 30-year loan with a fixed interest rate of 3.75, which that's really good for a loan of this size.
Yeah.
And the first payment, once again, deferred for 2 years. So it's a real good has real good terms for the borrowers.
No kidding. Words of wisdom. If you were to kind of consult with somebody who's considering this, maybe the first time, or bumping up the amount that they received from their initial application on the EIDL program, what kinds of words of wisdom would you have for a borrower?
All right. So if your business has already received an EIDL loan and is eligible for an increase, do not apply for another loan. I'll say that again. Do not apply for another loan. You will submit a loan modification through your existing SBA portal account on that same loan, just requesting an increase. Once again, do not apply for another loan if you've already received a COVID-19 EIDL loan. However, if your business has not received an EIDL loan, you would just need to create an SBA portal account and then go through the process as normal. So, thing to take away from this, once again, if you already received an EIDL loan, do not apply for another loan.
I got to ask, just because I'm one of those people, what happens if you do apply for another loan? Do you get sucked into some alternate dimension?
And no, but it's going to cause duplicate. It's going to cause duplicate applications at the SBA, and you're going to have to talk directly to the SBA to get that rectified, to get one of those duplicate, or to get the duplicate application off your record. So it's not the end of the world. You're not going to fall into what did you say, the alternate dimension or anything like that in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if you know what that is, but it's not the end of the world. But it's just it will cause you a headache and lots of time to fix. So,
gotcha. Brian Smith, updates on the EIDL, the new program changes that have happened in the last couple of weeks. I really thank you for your time. That's a great summary. Any other last words of wisdom or anything else you need to add here?
I hope you all have a great day.
Love it. Have a great afternoon, Brian.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
Cheers.